Very good evening and a warm welcome to the workshop on how to critically analyze a research paper. Today we have with us Dr. Sushant Sindhe sir. Sushant sir has done his masters from AIMS Delhi, and he is keenly interested in rheumatology. He is the founder of Quest Medical Academy and co-founder of Quest Clinics. Sir has been regularly guiding UG students in the field of research and innovation through his program called Quest Unplugged. So, with this brief intro, I welcome Sir and ask him to kindly take the workshop ahead.
Hello.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, hi. So first of all, thank you, Sirish, and your entire team, and for all the participants who are here. And so let's dive into this topic. I'm really glad to see that there are students who are interested in the middle of the lockdown in learning about research. You have a very good workshop lined up. I saw your the schedule that you had sent me. I'd seen that. So I'm sure you have gone through the lectures that have occurred, that have happened before me. Those are important lectures to understand what we are going to discuss today. To study a paper or to study an article, we need a lot of things that come from what has been discussed already. You might find some parts where I'm repeating things which were said earlier. You might find some things are new. You might also find that there are some things which were told to you earlier. I'm just expressing them in a little slightly different format. So feel free to reach out to me and have a question over there. I would want this session to be interactive. So at any point, if you feel that there is a part that you have not understood or you want me to go into the depths, wherever I can, I would love to do that. Of course, I'll have to tell you the limitations. This is a vast field. There are going to be things beyond my knowledge, and I would have to humbly tell you that well, this is something I know and this is something I do not. Right. So with those ground rules, let's dive into the topic. So the first question, of course, is going to be when you are trying to read a research paper. See, as different as you go ahead in your journey as medical students, at different times in your career, you will have different reasons to read a paper. At this point, some of you might be curious to read the paper just because you want to learn how do you read a paper. But that's not really how you would want to do it later in life. There are going to be times in future when you will be doing your thesis. At the time when you do your thesis, you will need to read other papers because you will want to learn from what other people have done so that you determine how your thesis should be framed. That is one use of reading the paper. In some time, you would also become practitioners and you have a question as to, I have done this till now for my patient and I want to do something beyond this. Is there something new? And if there is something new, how well established is it? Or someone might tell you, there is a new therapy which is out there. You should try it out for your patient. You would want to read a paper again at that time to understand whether reading the paper using that paper, can you further, take it forward and use it for your patients. So to actually apply it for your patients, you might want to read a paper. There will also come a time when most of you, I'm sure, will do your own research, not for thesis, but for when you become practitioners, you'll identify questions in your population, the people that you're treating, the community that you're serving, and you will want that, I want to establish something that I believe is happening here. I want to establish it, or there's a new drug I'm working on, there's a new surgical procedure I'm working on. I want to establish that this really works. Again, you would want to go back and read papers and see what has already been done in that field. Right? So these are various ways in which you would want to read paper. Every time that you try to do that, you will have differences from what we are going to say right now. You might want to read a certain part, not read a certain part, depending on what do you want to reach out to. Now, I'm hoping that all of you have got the email or in some format I've got the article that I've shared with you. I'm going to use that article as a kind of a learning point from where we will try to figure out what all we are going to apply, right? Now, let me first introduce that article and what are the subparts of an article. So when I pick up an article, what are the subparts that I should be looking out for, right? So let's start from there. I'm just a little new to this platform, so let me just see if I'm able to share my screen. Shirish, you'll have to help me and tell me if you're able to.
On the right right lower corner, just present one of the windows in which your PDF is open.
Okay. I have to present one of the windows. Just give me a second. Okay. So are you seeing my screen right now?
No, no.
Are you seeing
Now it's visible, right? Now it's visible.
now it's visible, right? Okay. So this is an article that I have shared with all of you, and I would want you to kind of open up this article in whichever format that you are using right now. You can simultaneously open up the article, and it's going to be important that we know what these different parts are. Now, as a disclaimer, I should tell you that this is an article from the New England Journal of Medicine, and I'm using it just for a learning and teaching purpose. There is no other use of this article at this point, so it's only for the learning purpose that I'm using this article, right? So when we are trying to read an article, so the first, of course, most important, the boldest thing here is the journal. Where is that article published in? That becomes a really important thing for us. Why is that important? Well, there are going to be many journals. There are going to be many journals out there, and you want a journal which has a good track record, that it has been publishing the best of the articles. How do I know that? Now, there is something known as an impact factor, right? So those of you who want to write this word, you should write down this one, kind of a learning point out of this lecture, that there is something called as an impact factor. If you just Google up, you will find that there are impact factors of every journal that you will find. Impact factor in a small way tells you that if a particular thing is published in a journal, then how likely is it to change practice? That is what impact factor tells you. For example, if something is published in the New England Journal of Medicine, NEJM, it is very likely that that particular research, that particular article was so important that people started changing their practice in response to that article. That is the impact of it getting published in NEJM. So NEJM, New England Journal of Medicine, that we just now saw, Lancet, the BMJ, British Medical Journal, JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association. So these are some of the topmost journals that I would want to follow. If anything is published here, it will have my respect, it will have my attention. I would want to see whether that article is really nice. I would want to read more about that article. The field that you pick up. Now, some of you might have a question, how will I know which is the best journal to read? So I told you the field, the journals from my field. In medicine, these are the important journals. Tomorrow, you might become a gynecologist, you might have different journals which are important. You might become, let's say, an endocrinologist, you might have some different set of journals. You might become a surgeon, you might have a different set of journals. Whichever field you specialize in, you will eventually know which is the most important journal in that particular segment. But everywhere, the principle is the same. It needs to have the highest impact factor. Some of the top most impact factor journals is what you would like to read. Overall in medicine, the entire MBBS curriculum that you have, NEJM continues to carry the biggest impact factor. If you go back to Harrison's today, you will find this very interesting that in Harrison's, go back and see the diagrams in Harrison's. You will find a lot of those diagrams are referenced back to NEJM. That means they have come from articles which were published in NEJM. So that is just to give you a clue how important NEJM is. It's almost like whatever comes in NEJM eventually in some way or other makes its way to Harrison, which by the way, most of us feel that it's such a wonderful book that Harrison says, right? So it gets a lot from this journal called NEJM. So when I start reading an article, I would want to see where is it published. Tomorrow, it might happen that you are sitting somewhere and someone comes across and tells you, "Arey, something has been published. Malum hai, aisa hota hai, waisa hota hai," something of that sort, and you might be very tempted to believe it. Always ask, where was it published? Was it published in a reasonable place? Was it published in a place that you're aware of? Is this a journal that you kind of want to believe in? There are also now journals which are sort of paid journals coming up. There is a big hue and cry coming up there. So be aware of that these are not paid journals. These journals, it's a matter of esteem that someone gets published in NEJM. So these are journals which are peer reviewed. That means there is a strict team which is sitting to see whatever gets published is of the highest quality, right? So they've done a good job for me. It makes my life easier if it is published in NEJM. So the first thing I would want to see is definitely, is it published in NEJM, right? The second thing I would like to see.
So your screen sharing has stopped.
Yeah.
Now it's visible again.
I know, I stopped it. So I'll keep on stopping it wherever I don't need to show you anything on the screen, right?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
I hope that's fine. Okay. Shirish, is there a marker for me to write anywhere on this screen? I'm
No, Meet doesn't have those
It
features that's
doesn't have
available.
it. Okay, okay. Sorry. So no, I was just yeah. So the second thing I'm interested in is one is the journal. The you are able to see my cursor, are you?
Yes, cursor, everything else is visible. Whichever,
Oh,
whatever is available on your computer is visible.
okay, great. So the other thing which I'm interested in is the time when it was published. So for example, if you today in 2020 tell me that what something was done and some treatment has come in stroke and that treatment works, and if you tell me that it was an article of 1980s, I'll say 1980s 40 साल हो गए. I don't need to really look at 1980s data to treat stroke in 2020. But if you tell me 2018, this is when the journal was published, I mean, the article was published, I'll say, yes, that makes sense. So when was it published? Definitely makes a big sense to me. So where was it published? When was it published? Very basic thing, I definitely need to know. The next thing, very important, which I can get even from reading the abstract or by reading the methodology, is what type of article is it? What type of study is it? Now here, I know that you all have kind of had your lecture on study designs. I would like to tell you that that lecture of study designs you should revise at this point. What kind of a study was it? It matters a lot because that is going to be how you are going to read that article. That article is eventually a study which has been published or a part of the study which has been published. So you want to know what kind of a study design it was. I would like to quickly recap that part for us over here because I'll not take a lot of time here, but it's important because we need to remember that whatever happens, the basic thing is going to be a kind of study. About whatever can get published or whatever you want to believe in could be an expert opinion. So you could have an expert opinion on a particular matter, right? Shirish, again, I'm hoping you're able to see this. I'll keep on asking you because I am not used to
Yes,
this.
sir.
But
Yes,
you
yes.
see what I'm writing, right?
Visible. It's visible.
Yes. Okay. So the basic thing that might happen is you might get an expert opinion that some expert has written about it. Something as new as COVID, you might have an expert writing an article that we believe at our center this is how we would treat COVID. This could have happened early in the pandemic. Doesn't happen now, but early in the pandemic you had that. There were experts coming in. You have seen a lot of experts now out there who give out their opinions about how things should be done. It matters when I don't have a lot of evidence. So experts are very, very important for us. It could be someone like your head of department, but there is a problem. The problem with the expert is even if the opinion can come very fast, this can come really fast. I believe today I can write tomorrow and publish it. There is a problem, and that problem is the problem of bias. It could have a bias. It is possible that, and I mean, not because the expert is wrong, not because the expert believes in something wrong, but because the expert has seen only a part of the story. Maybe the expert has not been exposed to the entire thing. So whatever the expert believes in comes out of a bias, a hidden thing, not an agenda, but a hidden thing, right? So I need to clear this bias. I need to have studies. I can't just believe on experts. I need experts to interpret a lot of things, but I also need studies. Then comes the kind of studies which you have heard of, like the case control or the cohort studies. These kind of studies, the observational studies, these are very important studies. These are important studies. These are also very fast studies. They would also contain bias, but the bias will go on reducing. So bias is going to be lesser compared to maybe in an expert opinion. But then I can go further and I can have another type of study, which is considered right now the gold standard, and that is randomized control trial. Randomization is a very important tool. You must have heard this again when study designs were discussed with you, that randomization is a very important tool to take away the bias. This bias that I might have, that I might, I might have conduct a study which is already tilted towards showing a particular result, can be taken away when randomization is done. Of course, it is difficult to do a randomized study. It is going to be costly. It is going to be time consuming. So if you ask me today, how many randomized control trials have come up on something as important as COVID? Not many. Most of the study published today are falling into this category for COVID. These now are coming up after so long because it takes time to enroll patients here. It takes time to do this kind of study. But if you ask me what is the best kind of study you can do, I'll say the best kind of study I can do is randomized control trial. Why is it the best? Well, it is the best because the bias is less. So obviously, when I'm reading an article, I want to know what kind of an article is it. Is it an expert opinion? Is it a case control study or cohort study, or is it a randomized control trial? But sometimes it might be beyond this. It might not be an article which is a study, but it might be an article which is a or it's a interpretation of multiple studies. It's an analysis of multiple studies. I wouldn't go into the depths of what these two terms mean, but I'm sure you have heard these terms. It could be either a meta-analysis or it could be a systematic review. Two similar but slightly different terms. It could be a meta-analysis or could be a systematic review. Basically, that means that experts from the fields, again, we can't do away with experts. We need experts. We all would want to be an expert in some field or the other. So the expert from the field has taken all the data that has come in the last few years, 5 years, 10 years, depending on what field we are talking about, and summarize that into these, or kind of analyze that into these kind of studies, which are known as meta-analysis or systematic review. He has not actually studied patients to do this. He has actually studied the previous studies to come up with meta-analysis or systematic review. Right? This is also important. This is going to be a higher level of evidence. I will believe more in it, and the bias will probably be lower than this, because it's not just one RCT. Multiple RCTs will come together to give me this. And finally, you might have not one expert but multiple experts coming together as a society. It might be a society. For example, it could be British Thoracic Society, or it could be the American Thoracic Society or American Heart Association. These are all examples of multiple experts coming together, and they study everything which has happened in the let's say last 5 years or 10 years or 2 years, depending on what disease they are studying, and they will give you guidelines. So the last step in this block could be guidelines. Guidelines are what are issued in interest, so that physicians can use it for patients. So if you are a physician, so as I told you, when you are reading articles, you might have different reasons to read an article. So if you are a physician who is trying to find what should I do for my patient next, well, you are okay with reading this. If you are a person who is trying to find out what is the best thing which has happened in this particular field, because you are interested in maybe making a next study, or you are maybe interested in writing down something about it, or some form of research interest, you would want to be looking at this. But if you're someone who's working on a new kind of a disease, or you are dealing with something which is rare, you might be searching for articles which are of this type, because these are hypothesis generating from which you will want to do the further steps, right? So I come back to this idea that I want to know what is the journal, when was this particular study published, but most importantly, I want to know which of this study is being published, right? Now, most of the journals today, if you look at Lancet, if you look at NEJM, they are unlikely to accept your article if they are anywhere over here. Guidelines are free of cost, and guidelines are usually published in the journals which are run by the same society which publishes it, and guidelines are free of cost, available everywhere. What you will find getting published in NEJM or Lancet most often are these kind of articles, randomized controlled trials. Of course, COVID is an exception because we don't have a lot of RCTs right now. But otherwise, any other topic, if you open up NEJM at any point of time, most of the articles would be randomized controlled trials, right? You might have some expert opinions on some topics, but again, that's not where we talk about articles. When we say that I want to read a study, in a big journal, you'll find the study is very often a randomized controlled trial. So if I kind of have a look at, what kind of study we are looking at, let's go there. So this study that we have over here, the study that we are having over here, in the method section, you can see over here, it's a randomized trial. So I told you in NEJM, that's going to be the most likely trial that you're going to see. You're going to see a randomized controlled trial, right? So this is a randomized trial on whatever topic. That topic will come to that topic eventually, but it's a randomized trial. So I want to know what is the journal, when was it published, what kind of an article are you talking about? Is it a randomized controlled trial, right? Now, from this point onwards, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how do you critically analyze a randomized controlled trial. There are various checklists which are available. Now, this is a part again which will help you in future, that there are various checklists available of how do you kind of critically appraise an article. There are guidelines issued by different bodies on how do they want a particular article to be read or gone through. So I'm going to go through one guideline. I'm going to give you that resource also. You should kind of click a picture of my slide maybe when I'm sharing the screen, or write it down. And you can see there are you can go to that resource and download various checklists of how can you look at different articles. So how do you critically analyze an RCT? How do you critically analyze case control? How do you critically analyze meta-analysis? These steps could be slightly different, but I'm going to today use an RCT and I'm going to stick to an RCT, right? So before I go further, I would like to take any questions. We are a small cohort at this point. So if there are any questions on what I've said till now, because iske baad I will be dealing with, question wise, I'll be going through a checklist. So if there are questions,
Sir,
yes, please.
sir, regarding you said that the randomized control trials are the gold standard, but at a UG level, I think so it will be a bit difficult for us to perform RCTs, right? So what would be ideally the journals that we as UG students should approach, in your opinion?
So as I said, Ansh, right? Ansh is speaking, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So Ansh, hi. So see, the question that I'm talking about right now is not what trial can you do. It doesn't matter what are you doing. At this point, we are saying how do you read an article which has happened. So if I want to do anything, I need to know the best evidence which has been procured by science before me. We are all a part of a scientific community, and we are going to go forward by looking at what has been done by people who came before us, or are right now our seniors or our colleagues, and what more can we add to that science. We are not an isolated person or an isolated group in out of nowhere. We are a part of a journey that science is taking care. So in that philosophy, understand that people before me, whatever they have done, अब उससे मैं आगे RCT करना चाहूँ, उससे मैं आगे ऑब्जर्वेशनल स्टडी करना चाहूँ, उससे मैं आगे अपने पेशेंट को ट्रीट करना चाहूँ, doesn't matter. What matters is whatever people have done before me, what is the best that I have got, isn't it? Why should I read anything less than best before me? And the best that we know is RCTs or their analysis in meta-analysis or systematic reviews. So I should read that for whatever application I'm going to do. If I don't have an RCT, then I should read something else. It doesn't matter whether you're an undergraduate or you're a postgraduate or you're a consultant. The science doesn't change. So it's like saying this, that the question that you're asking me might just sound like this, that, oh, I am a third year student. So should I be really reading Harrison's, or is it okay if I just know the physiology? Anyways, I'm not going to treat patients right now, so I'm okay with physiology. Doesn't make sense, right? This question was kind of that way. So again, I'm not personally saying this. I'm just saying that don't keep that mindset. A lot of us do that. We think as undergraduates, we should not read big journals. Wrong. I would say as undergraduate is the best time to read the big journals because they are the most refined. The articles in NEJM and Lancet are so beautifully written. The language, the thought processes are so clearly written down that as an undergraduate, they are a good learning exercise, I would say. So start with RCTs, and it will take some time for you to actually develop the knack of reading observational trials and criticizing them. They are more difficult to criticize because they already have a lot of inbuilt problems, biases, which you will have to think your mind around. RCTs will have lesser biases, will make your job easier to read them. Okay, so that's my take on that. Any other questions?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so let's go one step further. And I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation with you right now. And just give me a second. So what we are going to do now is I'm going to run through these different questions. I would want you to maybe click a picture of this slide that you're seeing in front of you. This resource that I have highlighted is the resource that you can go to. There are many other such checklists which you can find where you can know how to critically appraise a particular article. On this resource where I have given you the checklist tool, there you will find that there are various, you can freely download these different checklists for RCT, for observational trials or whatever, right? Whatever that you're trying to do, right? I'm going to use the checklist for RCTs, and the questions that we should be asking is when I'm reading an article. So the article is in front of us. We are going to try and read that article from NEJM. We know NEJM is a good journal. We know it is 2018, which is not very far off. We know that it's a randomized controlled trial. We, let's say, are interested in that question. We want to know about that question. That's why we ran up with this article. The first question we should ask is, are the results of this trial valid? मतलब before I try to break my head on इस trial का मैं use कर सकता हूँ कि नहीं, मुझे पहले तो ये पता करना है कि is this really valid? Whatever they have done, is it really correct? Right? Now, how do I know that? The first question I should ask is, did the trial address a clearly focused issue? Right? So, did the trial address a clearly focused issue? And there comes the question of PICO. Now, what is PICO or PICO? I'm sorry, this is going to be a little tough. The sharing option on this is a little tough for me to get a hang around. So pardon me when I'm going to flip between these slides. So The PICO part is something, if again you're writing down, you should make a note of this. It might have been discussed with you somewhere else, but whenever I start either designing a trial for myself, whether it is an RCT, whether it is an observational trial, or when I'm reading an article, I'm interested in PICO, which stands for what was the population being studied? Who were they studying? What was the intervention that they did? What did they actually do? Remember, we are dealing with a randomized controlled trial, so they are going to do some intervention. They might give a drug, they might not give a drug, they might give an extra drug, they might withhold a drug, whatever. There is some intervention that has happened, right? Who was the control population? What was on the other side? Remember, that randomized control trial, there are going to be two arms. There is going to be the case arm, there's going to be a controlled arm, right? Who was on the other side? What were they comparing with? Were they comparing a population who was given a drug with population who was not given a drug? Was they comparing a population which was given a drug with a population which was given a different drug? Were they comparing population given a drug with a control which was on a placebo? What was on the other side, right? And finally, what was the outcome? So I need to remember the PICO. This is a very simple algorithm, PICO, which I would insist all of you, whenever you read up an article, whenever you plan your own thesis, you should think in terms of what is the population you're trying to study, what is the intervention you're trying to do, who is the control arm, and what is the outcome that you're trying to look at. Now, to understand this PICO in context of our article, let's look at our article now. Let's look at what is in this particular article. I would also like to introduce you to what are the different aspects of an article. In the article, always, at least in the NEJM or Lancet, you will find that this is the format they publish in, all the big journals. They would always have an introduction. So this part, the initial part, is the introduction. Introduction will tell you, the authors during the introduction will tell you what all has been done before me. Before I did this trial, what all was the existing knowledge in science? वरना तो आपने ये trial किया ही क्यों? So they are giving you the reasons. Why was this particular trial necessary? Why did we as a group or I as an individual think that a particular trial was necessary? This is also sometimes called a review of literature. You might find that, when you do your thesis, someone will tell you, okay, go and do a review of literature. This is the review of literature they have done. It's a summary of it, of course, but it's a summary of important articles or trials which were done before this particular trial started. This is important to tell me why the particular trial was done. But if you ask me what is the most important part of reading an article, I would say it is the methods section. Not the result, not the discussion, but the methods. I repeat, the most important part of reading an article is reading the methods section. And there are various formats in which methods can be written, and different articles will use different formats. Our particular authors over here have used that. They have told us about the trial design. They have told us about the trial population, who was being studied. They have told us about the trial treatment, what treatments were given. They have also told us what are the outcomes that they are going to study. They've also told us what is the statistical analysis, how are they going to analyze whatever results that they get, and that's it, right? Now, when I want PICO, I should be dealing with the method section. I'll come back to the method section in just some time. So first was an introduction, second was the method section. Third is the result section. In the result section, the authors are supposed to tell you what did they find. They are not supposed to justify it. They are not supposed to tell you whether this was right or wrong. They're just supposed to enumerate for you, okay, this is what we found. When we did the study by using such methods, by the time the study was ended, this is what I found in the results. Now, whatever is there in their result, they will have to describe it in terms of primary or secondary outcome and all of that. We'll come to that in just some time, right? And finally, after they have told the results, they would have to come to this section, that is the discussion session. Discussion mein, they are going to compare. They are going to say, okay, before us, जो हमने introduction में देखा था, before us, this is what was done. Now that our study has come into place, we can say, compared to what was done before us, this is what we can propose new. This is how we can understand the results of our study in context of what is already known to science. So discussion helps the authors to highlight the meaning. They will tell you the meaning of whatever has happened, right? So just give me a second. Yeah. So discussion helps them to give a meaning to whatever they have done. So if they have found a particular result, they will now elaborate on that and say, okay, इस result का ये मतलब निकलता है. That is what discussion does. You should take care that they have not mixed up the two. Results should be separate, discussion should be separate. Discussion is like taking the original review of literature and kind of telling you how that review of literature and their results kind of match up to give you the discussion. That's what is the outcome. Now we want to understand the population, the intervention, the control arm, and the outcome. Each of this is an important word. If we goof up the first step, understanding the rest of the article is all sham. I repeat, अगर आपको ये पहला step नहीं समझ आया, PICO नहीं समझ आया, तो उसके आगे ना there is a good chance that वो article कुछ और ही कह रहा था और आप कुछ और ही समझ रहे थे. Right? That's a big harm when you're trying to, when in the initial part of your journey as students or medical students who are reading journals. That's a big problem, that you might read an article and you might believe that what has happened is true, jabki there was a technical problem which you did not see. So going through the PICO helps you to know what were the technical parts. What the technical parts sound, तब जाके मैं आगे आर्टिकल का कुछ मतलब निकालूं. अभी मैं मतलब नहीं निकाल रहा हूं, सिर्फ समझना चाहता हूं वो कर क्या रहे थे. So who was the P, which was the population being studied? Now, to understand what is the population being studied, we need to remember that the population being studied will have two parts. They included certain population, that was the inclusion criteria, and they excluded some people, that was the exclusion criteria. Matlab, tomorrow when I use this study, so this study has studied aspirin with clopidogrel. So tomorrow if I use the results of this study, I can't use it for everybody. I can't say because a trial did this, everybody who's walking on the road, I'll give aspirin and clopidogrel. No. I'll have to say this study was done on a population which had certain inclusion criteria. That means they had these conditions met, and certain exclusion criteria. That means they did not have certain conditions. These were excluded. Only in such people, the results of my study are applicable. So I repeat, inclusion criteria is very important, and so is the exclusion criteria, because that defines the population that was being studied, and that is where the results are applicable. I cannot apply the results of this particular study to every Tom, Dick, Harry who's walking on the road, right? So let's go to the method section. The method section is over here, and let's see whether they have told us the inclusion and exclusion criteria, right? So let's quickly run through the trial design and oversight. So they're talking about, in this area where my cursor is, we have enrolled patients in the randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial from so-and-so date to so-and-so date in so many centers. It was approved by ethics committee. All these are important lines, that they had an ethical committee approval. If the protocol is available somewhere else, that's fine. They had a separate committee which was responsible for the design, interpretation, and supervision. It was a sponsored trial, and it was sponsored by a government institute, as well as Sanofi, which is a pharma company, was providing them so-and-so drugs. But there was no other industry involvement in the trial, and the confidentiality was there between the authors and the pharma, and the authors vouch for the accuracy. Now, these are all important lines. Very often I get questions at this time from students. I have discussed this article with other students also at Quest. So I get these questions from students that, should we believe them? Answer is of course yes, without a doubt. What is important is to believe the integrity of the author. Critical appraisal का मतलब ये नहीं कि लोगों को criticize करो blindly. Critical appraisal का मतलब ये है कि humbly, with all respect, try to find a fault. But that respect is important. Remember that. Pun intended, the respect is important. You cannot go about saying they have written this, but they have not done this. You have to say, okay, they have written this, that means they have done this. But what is it that they have not written? What is it that they have skipped out? Right? Remember, these are big authors. If they write something like this, we'll believe them. An independent data and safety monitoring board was there, and that was based on the recommendations which were there, and they were talking to the executive committee, so on and so forth. Fair enough. Now comes the P. What was the population they were studying? What was the inclusion criteria? Was there an exclusion criteria? So if you read this through, I'm not going to enumerate everything, but here they go. Patients had to be at least 18 years old. That's the first inclusion criteria. They have, if they could undergo randomization between 12 hours of onset of the ischemic stroke, fair enough, that's the second inclusion criteria. They had to have a score of so-and-so on a particular scale. Now, abhi scale janna mere liye aaj zaruri nahi hai. If I'm an expert in this field, or if I'm a student of this particular thing, if I'm studying stroke, I would already have known the scale. If I don't know the scale, I should know that before I come to this article. Right? So I'm not going to describe the scales that they have used. I'm just saying that that's an inclusion criteria. So they use the score of so and so or less than that on a particular scale as an inclusion criteria, which means tomorrow I can't use the results of this trial for a student, for a patient who has a score of crossing the limit that they have set. Similarly, they have said that scores of score of 4 or more on ABCD scale, whatever that scale is, right? So these are all inclusion criteria. If you go through this entire paragraph, you'll find that there are inclusion criteria, right? They've also told you that patients were ineligible if the symptoms were limited to a certain thing, if there was isolated this, if there was this, if there was that, if there was this, if there was that. So they have also told you the exclusion criteria, right? Now, why is this step important? This step is important for me because this will tell me, is this something I really want to read? For example, tomorrow you might want to start reading a particular thing because you saw a patient in the ward and you want to start searching whether for this patient is there some new therapy available. You start with this step. You find an RCT by doing the literature search online on PubMed or wherever. When you find the article, first go and see whether the population matches. If the population in which that article was done and what the kind of patient that you have, they don't match, then the results don't really matter to you. It's not a trial for you. You can stop your further search. Right? So the P was important. Second step was, what was the intervention? What is it that they were going to do? Right? What is it that they were going to do? So let's go further. Trial treatments. This is where the intervention comes in place. So people were randomized in 1:1 ratio, fair enough. They received either clopidogrel plus aspirin or placebo plus aspirin. So now you know what was the intervention and you also know what was the control arm. You know that the population arm, the P was going to get clopidogrel plus aspirin and the other group was going to get aspirin plus placebo. So you have the P, you have the I, and in the same line, they have also told you the C, that the control arm was going to get placebo plus aspirin. I'll not go through this because they have further described what kind of doses they were going to give. Next comes O, outcome. So this is the outcome. Now, in the outcome, there are some very important words you should be searching for. You should be searching कि कहीं पे उन्होंने ये लिखा है कि नहीं लिखा है. You should be searching where have they mentioned the word primary outcome, right? जहां पर उन्होंने लिखा है primary outcome, that is what their study was designed for. I repeat, O is very important. You should search for the word primary outcome because wherever they say this is the primary outcome, that is what the study was powered and designed for. Everything else that they say is okay, but I'll say I'll take it with a pinch of salt. You were not powered, you were not designed for answering that question. The whole study, the whole statistics of the study, the whole design of the study was powered or was geared toward answering one question, which is the primary outcome. Now, there is a problem when you do RCT. RCTs, I told you some time back, are very costly, very expensive studies. So when people do RCTs, they want to do an RCT, but also when they do put in so much effort, 2 years, 5 years of effort across so many countries, when the data comes in, they would want to, of course, it's a human tendency. They would want to say, अच्छा हमने इतना ढूंढ लिया है, चलो इसमें इतना कुछ हमको और भी मिल गया, वो भी बता देते हैं दुनिया को. Nothing wrong. But when they are telling that to us, you should always be sure that whatever results they found, of that, what is it that they were truly searching? They were searching the primary outcome. They were comparing the groups on primary outcome. The entire design was made for primary outcome. So always look at the population being studied and always look at the primary outcome. Is this primary outcome what you are trying to find for your patient? Are you trying to say whether my patient will survive better or not? Is that what your question is? If that's not your question, if your question is, I'm going to give a new antihypertensive agent, will it cause bleeding or not? That was not the primary outcome. This is not the study for you. Getting it? So you need to look at the P, you need to look at the I, you need to look at the O. This is perhaps the most important thing I've told you. So I would want to wait again over here and I'd like to take your questions. Any questions, any part which was not clear?
I guess people have understood.
Okay, great. Anybody has a question? I'll keep on halting at points because I believe these are the things that you will need out of the whole thing. One quick question: is this being discussed already? It shouldn't be that I keep on repeating things which have already occurred. So, just a quick question.
Oh, the thing that you mentioned about study design and evidence has been discussed in detail.
Agreed.
The one about PICO is being discussed freshly by you.
Freshly. So this is new, right? This is not
PICO is new, yeah.
Right. Okay. So let's go to the next question then. Thank you, Sirish, so much. So let's go to the next question now. The next question for us. So the first question that we try to answer is, what is the focus of this study? What were they trying to search? What was their population? What was their intervention? What was the control? What was the outcome? The next question for us is, was the assignment of patient randomized? How was it carried out? Was the allocation of the concealed from researchers and from the patients? Right. So I'm going to keep this question open to you, and I would like to hear from you. Is this given anywhere in your article? The article is in front of you, so I would want you to search this. Actually, I've gone through this already by now, so I would want you to search and tell me this answer. Have they mentioned anything about randomization in this study? You know where to look for. You have to look for in the method section. So I'll just hold on for the next 2 minutes, and I would want to know, how was the randomization carried out in this particular trial? Has it been mentioned? It's not necessary that you understand how it was done, because every trial will have different ways of doing it, and you can't possibly know all the ways. It's okay if you don't understand the way. The question is, have they mentioned it? Have they mentioned that such a thing has happened? And was it concealed from researchers and patients?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, it was mentioned.
So could you read out the line? What is written? Where are you reading?
Sorry.
Sir, in design and also it's mentioned like an executive committee did the entire design supervision, and so then we can see blinding where they must have decided and what drugs should be given and all should be was decided by the executive committee and not by the investigators.
So does that tell us about randomization? The answer is no. So that does tell us about who was taking
No.
decisions about the overview of the study. The executive committee is responsible for
Yes.
overview of the study, but they are not responsible for randomization. So where has it been mentioned that randomization did occur and that it was carried out in a particular way and that there was... Yes, please.
Yeah, I think I'm not so sure, but I'll try. I think it is in the trial treatment one, where it says that the patients were randomly assigned in a 1:1 ratio to
Wonderful.
receive either the clopidogrel plus aspirin or placebo plus aspirin with stratification according to the trial site, the use of an interactive web-based system.
Wonderful. So this tells you how was the randomization carried out. You get that? So this, you're absolutely right on track. This tells you how was the randomization carried out. It was carried out by a web-based software. So they use some software. So, let me give you an example. One of the easiest way that you can randomize. So one of you just now mentioned that we are students. How can we do a randomized control trial? Not so difficult. So one of the easiest way to randomize is, maybe you can pick up a chit. Maybe there are two groups. One is going to get the treatment arm, another is going to get the standard arm, and you have already made those chits and put them in a box, and your patient comes and you want to randomize the patient. Pick up any one of them. Whatever he picks up, he gets randomized. It could be as simple as that. Randomization is not necessarily a complex step. But remember, this was a multi-center trial. This was happening across countries. So they couldn't really keep one box and say, "Isme se chit utha lo." They couldn't do that. So they required a web-based device. So the patient would typically have an assistant, nurse or someone would call up at a center and say, okay, we have a new patient. We want to enroll a new patient. On that center, there will be a computer which will be generating a code. It will generate randomly a code and say, this is your code, open up the code. When you open up the code, you get assigned to group A or to group B. That's what has happened. So wonderful. This was the randomization.
So I have a
Just a minute. I'll just complete this and I'll take your doubt. It also mentioned there's a 1:1 randomization. What do you mean by 1:1 randomization? That means for every one patient who went to P population group, one patient went to C, the control group. You can sometimes get a 2:1 randomization. Two go to the study group, one comes to the control arm. Sometimes you might have the opposite, one comes here, two goes there. Sometimes you might have a three-way randomization. It could not for this case, but it could sometimes be like this, that one patient got maybe aspirin plus clopidogrel, someone else got only aspirin, third one got nothing. That's also possible. I mean, it depends on what trial you're doing. It could also be someone got 120 milligram dose, one got 80 milligram dose, third one got 40 milligram dose of a particular drug. So you can have randomizations like these. That has to be mentioned. How was the randomization done has to be mentioned. And this study does mention it. Yes, sorry. I think Ira, you were speaking. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just asking that, like you suggested that we can randomize like using chits, but how can we maintain a 1:1 ratio if we do that? I
When
mean,
you
is
make
it
the chit, if you already have, you know that your sample size has already been calculated. The statistician has told you need, let's say, 100 students, 100 participants, and you have decided I want to do a 1:1 randomization. All of this has to be pre-decided. The authors have done that before they started the trial. So remember, I'm not teaching you how to design a trial. I'm teaching you how to read a trial. So there's a difference. So they've already done this before they started the trial. And at that point, if you were the author, you would have made 50 chits of maybe group A, 50 chits of group B. Keep them together, ask the patient to pick up a chit. If that comes out group A, well, you get the therapy which has been assigned for A, which it comes out B, then you know that you are getting the therapy of B, right? That brings me to the second question. So this is how you could use the chit. But that brings me to the second question, which was on my slide. Was the patient and the researcher aware of the allocation? Were the allocations concealed from them, or were they aware of this? What do you think about this? Anybody would like to take the second part? Is it mentioned anywhere? And what does this really mean?
Sir, just above the trial population paragraph, it's mentioned the members of independent clinical event committee were unaware of group assignment, adjustment, primary and secondary efficacy outcome, and major minor bleeding events.
Okay, so they were the people of the executive committee, but they were not the. Okay, so they were okay. So they were
Sir,
the.
it is a double-blind study.
What do you mean by double blind?
Yeah. So the patient and the investigator don't know like who is getting what.
Exactly. So in my example, I told you that if I take chit box and I keep a chit box A and a chit box B, and the patient picks up and knows that he's A, there's no longer blinding. No, he knows he's getting A. And if you have counseled him that, okay, you're going to get one drug at 120 milligram, another person will get the drug at 60 milligram, and he knows he's going to get 120 milligram, he's no longer blinded. How will that change anything?
It eliminates patients as well as investigator bias. Like if patient is receiving placebo, he would think, "नहीं मेरे को तो कुछ नहीं होने वाला." So
Exactly.
that things would come in.
Exactly.
And again, investigator bias can come in because if he will think कि अगर कोई placebo receive कर रहा है, इसको कुछ होना ही नहीं चाहिए.
Exactly. So blinding is a very important step to eliminate that kind of a bias which will creep in, right? There should not be a subjective component कि मुझे लग रहा था कुछ नहीं होने वाला तो कुछ हुआ ही नहीं, ठीक है? So you're absolutely right on track. So you need to know whether randomization was done, how was it done. Now we know that in this article. We need to know when the randomization was done, was it blinded process, right? So this was a double-blinded trial. Now sometimes it might not be possible to do a blinding. Can you think of an example where blinding cannot be done? Anyone? Can you think of examples where blinding cannot be done and you are still okay with it? NEJM can publish articles which were non-blinded. Can you think of such articles? Randomized but non-blind. They are also known as open label. So non-blind articles are also sometimes referred as randomized open label trial. So what do you mean by an open label trial? Why is it acceptable? Can you think of any example? Yeah, so I'm getting a message in this thing, surgical procedure. Absolutely right, Pawan. So think of it. If I'm going to, let's say, do a trial on acute appendicitis, and I want to try out half the patient randomized to get medical therapy, half to get an open surgery, laparotomy. Of course, I can't randomize it and tell this patient, nahi, tumko surgery nahi hua tha. He's going to get operated. He knows that he got operated, right? And the other one knows that he didn't get operated. This has to be an open label, right? So open label is also okay if what you're studying is so different. But otherwise, you can use a placebo, right? Think of it. Here they have used a placebo. Why do you think they used a placebo? The placebo helps. Remember, they could have just given an aspirin tablet to one and given clopidogrel and aspirin to other one. But the tablet count would have been different, no? एक को दो गोली मिलता, एक को एक ही गोली मिलता. So what they did nicely is they used a placebo instead of clopidogrel. So both of them got 2 tablets. So they are blind. They don't know what tablets they got. They just gulped in the tablets. The placebo has to look very similar to the clopidogrel. So aspirin दोनों को मिला, एक को clopidogrel मिला, एक को placebo मिला. वो placebo देना जरूरी था. अगर वो नहीं देते, so there would not have been blinding, because then one would have got 2 tablets, one would have got 1 tablet. So that's the meaning of saying that yes, they have done the randomization, they have done a double-blinded trial. That's very interesting. So you guys have figured out that the second question also seems to be right in place, that these guys have done their job well, right? Let's go to the next one. The third question that we have to address is, were all the patients who entered the trial properly accounted for at the conclusion? And this is a very difficult question. At sometimes early in your career, you might find this question really difficult. And here we have to answer two questions as sub part of this. Ki everybody who entered the trial, what happened to them till the end? Do we know about it? ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए कि किसी trial में someone entered and left midway through and you are not aware of it. That should not occur, right? Why did he leave midway through? If he left midway through, did he have a complication? Something else happened to him? We need to know this, right? Now, I'm going to again write down some aspects over here. So just give me a second. Let's think this through. You might have a situation like this, that let's say 100 patients joined the trial, and I have randomized, so 100 control people, people joined in the control arm. So these ones got aspirin and clopidogrel, this one got only aspirin, right? I continued the trial for some time, and over the next few years, I found that people were leaving out of this. There were people leaving out of this, and there were people leaving out of this also. Why did they leave these groups? I don't know, but I do know that by the time the trial ended, from these 100 over here, I had just 90 left over here, and over here, I had 92 left. So 10 people left over here, and 8 people left over here. Now, I need to know about these 10 and about these 8 as well, right? Now, when the study ends, let us say I have completed the study. I had planned to give the drug for maybe 6 months period. So I've given the drug for 6 months period, but in this 6 months, these 10 people and 8 people left. When the study ends, the question is, whom do I analyze? Now pay attention to the question, and I'm asking this question to you, and I'm going to ask you to take a, I don't know whether there's a poll option here or not. So I'll ask you to kind of verbally tell me what you think, or maybe put it in the chat box. Whom do you analyze? You have an option that you have randomized 100 people here, 100 people here, and then at the end of 6 months, 60 have completed this, 92 have completed this. Whom do you analyze the results in? When the author tells you the results, should I tell you the results of these 90 and 92? Those who completed the trial? So I wanted to study giving the drug for 6 months. What does it do? I give the drug for 6 months, and should I look at this? If I do this, that is called per protocol analysis. Per protocol analysis means by protocol, my plan was people should complete the 6-month therapy. So these are the people who have completed 6-month therapy. So I'll analyze the results of this 90 and this 92. That is known as per protocol analysis. There is another option that I might say, nahi. मैंने 100 लोगों से शुरू किया था. There were 100 patients and there were 100 controls. I will analyze everybody because I intended to treat these 100. So क्या हुआ उसमें से 10 चले गए, तो क्या हुआ तो इसमें से 8 चले गए. मैं इनके results भी देखूंगा, right? And I will analyze everybody who went in. If I don't know the results, I will tell you that I don't know the results, but I will take all of this as my denominator. My denominator will be 100. Right? So even if I don't know the results, I will say whatever I see, the good part or bad part happen to this 100 out of 100, right? That is known as intention to treat analysis, right? So per protocol analysis and intention to treat analysis. The question is, both are done. You'll find that both are done in different articles. You'll find different things are done. Which is better? Which type of analysis do you think, if your journal has done or your article, has done, you would prefer to continue reading this article? Right? Both are done, that's okay. But if only one of them is done, which one would you prefer? That's the question to you. Per protocol or intention to read. By the way, do click a picture of this slide and keep for your reference tomorrow. But in the meanwhile, I would like to take your answers. If you can type it out in the chat box, that's great. If not, you can unmute yourself and tell me.
Intention to treat.
Okay, so let's just tick. I have one on intention to treat side. Anything else? Anybody else?
per protocol.
Okay. Please don't repeat yourself because I'm just listening to your voice. I don't know who's speaking. So one vote goes here, one vote goes here. Any other votes anywhere?
Per protocol.
Okay, I have one more vote on this side.
Intention to
Intention to treat.
Per
Per
protocol.
Now we need at least one girl to speak here and one boy to speak here.
There are
Intention to treat.
options on the chat. People have voted on the chat.
They have? Okay, I'll just stop the screen share and go there. I'm sorry, I'm not very used to this platform, so it's a little tough. Okay, so we have per protocol, ITT, PP, ITT, ITT Thago, PP, ITT, ITT. Okay, that's quite almost an tilt towards ITT in your chat box, but a tilt towards per protocol over here. Now let's pay attention. Again, I need to close this and yeah. So let's pay attention. Understand there is a reason why people have left. And I don't know the reason. I don't know why 8 people left over here, why 10 people left over here. Right? अगर मैं देखना चाहता हूं कि मेरी दवाई देके फायदा कितना हुआ, तो per protocol is a good idea. It tells me what happened when I gave the drug, what advantage or disadvantage, whatever happened to the patients who completed receiving that drug, what happened to them. Per protocol is good to tell me that. But there is a problem that people have left in between. This is also known as attrition. There was an attrition in the study. People have left the study in between. Now, they could have left because they had an adverse effect. They could also have left because the drug was doing something which the authors did not know about and the patients were uncomfortable with. It could have been an inconvenience of the therapy. It could have been something else which we don't know the exact answer to, but in real world, that might matter to me. For example, let's think of this. When I treat patients in real world, when I tell my patients, you have blood pressure, start antihypertensive drugs. Do I really expect कि मैंने एक पेशेंट को बोला कि एंटी हाइपरटेंसिव ड्रग तुमको अब 10 साल लेना है, लाइफ लॉन्ग लेना है, और सब 100 के 100 पेशेंट जो मेरे पास आके जाते हैं वो सब उसको कंप्लायंस के साथ फॉलो करते हैं? Not really. I know that in real world also attrition is a problem. So intention to treat takes that into account. It takes that into account. It might actually dilute the result I'm going to see, but I'm okay with it because it will give me a more real life account. It will tell you more how this will look like in real world also. In real world also, people will walk out and say, okay, someone told me to take the drug. I took it for some time and I left it. I didn't complete it for 6 months. I didn't complete it for 1 year. And you will have to analyze that also. Despite that, if your drug is working, then you have a good drug at hand. But if with that your drug is not working, it works only when people complete the therapy. Maybe your drug is not that really good. Maybe there is something more to the drug which you have not understood, right? So intention to treat analysis is always considered the better analysis. Most of the journals will give you both the analysis, and most of the times, if they have done a good trial, many people don't walk out of the trial, they look the same. But if many people do walk out of the trial, then intention to treat is a better analysis. So please make a note of this if you're writing down anything from this discussion today, that intention to treat analysis is what you would want your patients, want your authors to report, right? Also, you would want your authors to tell you, was this 6 months really completed? Was the 6 months really completed? There is a possibility that you started the trial, but midway through, your executive committee, jiski baat ho rahi hai is trial mein, they decided to stop the trial. They told you, nahi, aur trial karne ki zarurat nahi. Why would they do that? This executive committee or the steering committee has some special rights when you're doing a trial. For example, let's have a look over here. Let's have a look over here. It is possible that, this is the timeline and this is the effect that you're going to see. And you know that my standard therapy is aspirin. So when I give aspirin, I get this kind of a graph, this kind of an effect. Let's say this is a positive effect, so many lives being saved, whatever that effect might be. I'm getting this kind of a graph when I use only aspirin. When you start a trial, what the trial design does is very often they will tell you beforehand, especially if you're going to do a long trial. This was a trial which was going to be done for like 5 years, 6 years, 10 years. This is a long trial. Very often, before you start the trial, you have to define what is the positive margin and what is the negative margin. That means if the next red line that I'm going to draw is the result that is going to happen when I give clopidogrel and aspirin together, then now A is what is standard. I can get this data from the previous trials, right? So I expect that the result when I give aspirin and clopidogrel should be better. Magar better matlab kitna? It could be better matlab something like this. If this is happening, I would want to analyze for the entire 5 years that the study was planned for. But if by chance I find that the result is so good, so at this point itself, maybe at the second year itself, I had found that the red line was far better than the blue line. So और 3 साल तक मैंने resources waste क्यों किया? I could have stopped the trial here and said, okay, it is already better. I don't need to do the trial more. It is also possible that I tried the trial thinking that the red line is going to be above the blue line. It's going to be better than the blue line. But in reality, something like this happened, that when I started giving it, side effects started coming in, and this happened. That somewhere at maybe 2.5 years, I found that the side effects were unacceptably high. I should again plan to stop the trial, right? So I repeat, when you start a long trial, when you do a long trial, now this doesn't happen in the trials that you and me are going to plan in India at this point of time, let's be honest. But in multi-centric trials, especially the ones that you will see published in NEJM, this is a very beautiful function that you will see. That they plan out what is the effect that they are looking out for. And if you cross that effect before, they will stop the trial. Now, this is important for me. If they stop the trial because the result was too good, badhiya hai, bahut achhi baat hai. But if they stop the trial because harm was too much, now that is something I have to be careful about, right? So I would want you to read about this particular trial and tell me what have they done? Have they stopped the trial in between? And if they have stopped the trial in between, why have they stopped the trial in between? So go ahead, read the article and tell me, have they stopped the trial in between? And if they have stopped the trial in between, why have they stopped the trial in between?
So in 2017, it was discontinued due to major risk of hemorrhage was exceeded.
So do you think they stopped it because it was doing well, or they stopped it because it was harming more?
It was harming more.
Exactly. Are you getting it? So now you know that when you are going to study a trial, you have to look out for whether the trial was stopped in between, right? But remember, is that wrong? Is that wrong on the part of the journal or on the part of the people who did the trial to do such a trial?
No, because there was no previous evidence of beneficial or risk.
Exactly. So doing this gave me this kind of an evidence, right? But now that they stopped the trial, they would still want to tell us when they stopped the trial, what was the result? क्या उस समय तक कोई फायदा भी हुआ था कि नहीं हुआ था? So they will still analyze. Now I would want you to look into this journal again, the article again, and tell me, how did they analyze? Did they use intention to treat, or did they use per protocol? What have they used? Can anyone look into and tell me what kind of analysis have they done, and tell me where are you going to look for that? Please go to page number 217 of that article and go into statistical analysis. You'll find your answer over there.
Yes, sir. There is a big table where they have actually summarized everything, and then at the bottom they have written intention to treat.
Exactly. But where in the journal should I read? ये table तो NEJM में इसलिए publish हुआ है.
Yes,
But
yes.
journal कोई और होता तो शायद table publish नहीं होता. So which part of the article should I be focusing to find this answer?
Statistical analysis under methodology.
Exactly. Where are you finding it? The second paragraph in that, page number 217, the second paragraph of statistical analysis. Do you see that we performed an analysis according to
Intention to treat principle.
principle? Would you believe them now? I'll say yes. इन्होंने जो भी publish किया है, I would want to believe it because whatever they have done by intention to treat analysis. They have stopped, so I'll be skeptical, but I will still say ऐसा नहीं कि उन्होंने गलत कुछ किया है, जो मिला उन्होंने बता दिया. That's a good thing. It is almost a negative result, but they have still published it. That's a good thing, right? Okay, so let me go one step further. So I hope this is kind of making sense. Why are we doing this? We are trying to figure out, is it really something which is helping? So by the time this third question comes in, I will have to ask myself a question. Is it worth continuing? Should I continue to read this particular journal, right? This question will depend on what are you reading the journal from. This is a very subjective question. If you are reading the journal for something despite knowing the fact that they have stopped the trial in between, go ahead. Otherwise, some of you might say, oh, अरे ये तो stop हो गई है bleeding की वजह से, ये रिस्क तो मुझे लेना ही नहीं, मेरा पेशेंट तो ऑलरेडी ब्लीडिंग के रिस्क वाला है, मुझे तो लेना ही नहीं है, तो ये रिजल्ट मुझे एप्लीकेबल ही नहीं. Some of you will say, नहीं नहीं नहीं, it's okay for me, bleeding risk तो मैं ऐसे भी देख नहीं रहा था, I was reading this journal for something else. What are you reading the journal for will decide whether it's worth continuing or not. For today's discussion, let's say that it's worth reading. So let's take the next question. The next question is, were the patients, healthcare workers, study personnel blind? Well, we have already found that answer while we were searching something else. Yes, they were blind. The randomization was done in a blinded manner. So we already know that blinding was there. Important question. Were the groups similar at the start of the trial? Were the two groups, P and C, similar at the start of the trial? What does this really mean? Can anybody explain what this question really means? Question number 5. Were the groups similar at the start of the trial? Can anybody explain this? What does this mean?
The ethnic group.
Yeah, sorry, please go ahead. Yeah, someone was speaking. Could you please go ahead?
Sir, the races, sex, all these things are, randomly assigned in the group.
Sorry, you'll have to repeat yourself. I couldn't get you.
I mean, there is an equal proportion of races, also both the sexes in the both groups, like population and control. So the groups were similar.
Why do I need that? You're right, but मुझे ऐसा क्यों चाहिए?
So that if there are any intrinsic factors that could influence, like there are chances that due to race there may be some intrinsic factor differences, there are factor differences in the sex, so age factors may be different, so that may influence the results.
So one could be age, one could be race, one could be gender, but there could be other factors also, like what? Maybe I'm talking about aspirin being given to people. Maybe we want to have equal number of people on both sides who are having past history of some bleeding. We want to have equal people on both sides who have some other past history. So these are known as, so both of you are absolutely right, these are known as baseline characteristics. So I want you to open up your article again and search a table called baseline characteristics. Please go to your article again and search whether there is a table that you find which talks about baseline characteristics. Do you see that table? It's table number 1. You see that table? Now you find that almost all the RCTs, almost all the randomized controlled trials which are published, table number 1 is always the baseline characteristic. ये table होना ही चाहिए. If this table is not there, stop reading that article at that point itself, right? I repeat, this is a very important table. Without this, no good journal will publish your trial. And if this has not been published, that means the journal is most likely not very nice journal, and that article definitely is not been nicely written. So you need to have a baseline characteristics table. And what is important is not only for us to read each one of them. Now, again, if you are an expert in stroke, you will already know what you are searching for. But even if you're not, for the sake of discussion also, you need to read what all have they compared. They have compared age, they have compared gender, they have compared race, ethnic groups, fair enough. Regions matters maybe for them. Medical history, this is what I was talking about. What medical history have they taken into consideration? How many of them were having ischemic heart disease? How many of them were having hypertension? How many of them were having diabetes? Now it matters. Remember, they are looking at an endpoint of stroke. Now, some of you must be third year or final year students. You already know that hypertension and diabetes increases the risk of stroke. Ischemic heart disease, presence of it means already there is atherosclerosis, already there is a risk that someone has a cardiovascular disease. So having stroke is already at a high risk. I don't want less number of people here and more number of people here. I want them to be almost equal, right? So their percentages or their whatever values have been given, they should almost be same. So 10% here were already having ischemic heart disease. So almost 10% over here were again having ischemic heart disease. This should be matching. Similarly, other things that they have taken is time for presentation, quantifying events. So TIA wale kitne the and ischemic stroke wale kitne the. All of this matters. At baseline, they should be similar. This is also sometimes referred to as that I don't want to compare oranges and apples. I want to compare oranges with oranges. I don't want to say on one side I took oranges, another side I took apples, and I gave them the same drug. No, I want that both of them should be same at the baseline. So always look out for this, the slide called, this table called baseline characteristics. Okay. The next question that we should be looking out for is, aside from the experimental intervention, were the groups treated equally? Where should I search this? So I want to know कि जो हमने intervention किया वो तो ठीक था, हमने aspirin दिया, clopidogrel दिया, वो छोड़ के बाकी सब कुछ same दिया गया था या नहीं दिया गया था? Where should I search for that? So again, please go through the journal that article is in front of you. Go through that. Tell me, where did I get this information? What were they getting apart from that? Was it similar or was it different? Now, it might sound very logical, and in NGM there will be no mistakes on this, but there could be sometimes articles published in other journals where you might have a real tough time, and you might find that both the groups were not really getting the exact same treatment. They were getting already something else different apart from the intervention, right? So if I go to our article, even I'm actually searching where I've written that. They've actually not mentioned it anywhere else. Yeah, even I think that this one point they have not mentioned. They should have specifically mentioned that they have given all the other treatment as same. But at least at this point, while I'm screening through the article, I cannot find that. In the trial treatments, they should have mentioned it. They have not mentioned that line. So ideally, they should have mentioned that all the other treatments were continued as they would be required. Yeah. So that one line is, at least right now as I'm seeing it, it seems to be missing. Fair enough. So at least one point that we find is missing from the checklist for this particular article, right? Okay. Okay. The last part comes here. We need to know what are the results. So if by this point we are convinced that whatever we are looking for is this article, this is technically a sound article, now we should start looking for the results. What are the results? Now the first question is, how large was the treatment effect? What outcome was measured? Is the primary outcome clearly specified? Now we have seen that the primary outcome is what you need to design your trial for, but we have not actually seen what was the primary outcome they were studying, right? So just a minute. Are you seeing my screen right now? Shirish, are you seeing my screen right now?
PowerPoint is visible. PowerPoint is visible.
PowerPoint is visible. I'm sorry.
Not
I wanted to
that.
show.
Yeah.
Has that stopped right now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I'm not used to this platform.
It's okay, sir. It's okay. It's okay.
It's a little dodgy. Okay. Is the article visible right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So we need to know what was the primary outcome, right? So for that, okay, let's come to the outcomes over here, right? On the lower corner of your 217 page number, left lower corner, the primary outcome was the risk of composite of ischemic events, myocardial infarction or death from ischemic vascular causes, that is a major ischemia, on the basis of the standard definition. This was the primary outcome. That means this entire study was done to see that if I give clopidogrel plus aspirin to one arm and I give only clopidogrel to another arm, then will the risk of ischemia plus, ischemic stroke plus MI plus death, will that be lesser compared to giving only aspirin? That is the question that they have tried to answer, right? And the primary safety outcome that is, I told you that niche wala line, was that they were trying to see was the risk of major hemorrhage, and that major hemorrhage, which was defined by symptomatic intracranial hemorrhage, intraocular bleeding, transfusion of more than 2 units, or hospitalization, or a prolongation of existing hospitalization, or death due to hemorrhage. Any such major hemorrhage occurring. So you have to remember, such major hemorrhages have occurred enough for them to stop the trial, right? And these are not minor hemorrhages; these are quite major hemorrhages. If 2 pint blood chalana pade, that is quite a lot of hemorrhage. Bleeding enough to have loss of vision or intracranial bleed is a major hemorrhage, and they have found that such major bleeds were going up, so they have stopped the trial. But if I look at the primary outcome, I would like to see how did they analyze the primary outcome. So for that, I need to now come towards the results. In the results, they have told us that a pre-specified boundary, that was the lower boundary of safety, was exceeded, so they had to stop. But at the time of trial, 488% patients were enrolled, which represented 83% of the anticipated participants. So they thought that they will enroll certain number of patients, but out of that, 83% had been already enrolled. Discontinuation of the medical, of these, 98% were followed for at least 7 days, and 93% were had completed the 90-day visit or had died. The discontinuation of the trial medications occurred in 30% of the patients receiving the clopidogrel, and 25% of those receiving aspirin alone. The rates of withdrawal from the trial or loss of follow-up was 6.4% in the group receiving clopidogrel and 6.8% in aspirin. So these are really big numbers, right? 30% of patients in almost both the groups, 27 to 30%, have discontinued. This is what I was talking about, that here you definitely need an intention to treat analysis. Lot of people have left the trial. They have stopped taking the drug in between because of whatever reason. We don't know the reason, but almost 1/3 to one third patients have almost in both the arms stopped taking the drug, right? So we cannot do a per protocol here. We need an intention to treat. Now, the primary and the secondary efficacy outcomes. Now, again, because this has shown harm, I will perhaps not use this in real world, but because we are discussing how to understand an article, I'm going to read this part. The primary and the secondary efficacy outcomes, the composite primary outcome occurred in 5% patients recovering, getting clopidogrel plus aspirin, and 6.5% patients who were getting aspirin alone, with the hazard ratio of 0.75, 95% confidence interval of so-and-so to so-and-so, and a p-value of so-and-so to so-and-so, right? Now, I would want to focus on this much part of what does this mean. Now, it might mean nothing in this particular trial because I'm not going to use this trial any longer, because I know that so many people have left the trial and so many people have actually had complications in this trial. So I will say I don't want to use these results. But if I do want to use a result, this line needs to be understood. So I want to go into little details of what is the p-value and what is the confidence interval, right? So I'm going to just stop sharing at this point, and I'm going to put a question to you. How much of p-value and confidence interval has been discussed by now? So Shirish, you will have to tell me this.
It has been discussed in brief by our statisticians, sir. Like, what is a hypothesis? How is it tested? Like, where does a confidence interval fall in the normal distribution? Like the mean and the 1.96 standard deviation. Those things have been discussed.
Okay.
So that much is something that.
Okay, and confidence interval has also p-value has been discussed and confidence interval has been discussed.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just
yes, it has been discussed.
Okay. So I'll just briefly run through 2-3 points, not taking a lot of time over here, but 2-3 points which I believe we still need to remember whenever you're going to read a particular trial. That the first point I would say is always look for the primary outcome, right? Always look for the primary outcome. And when you're looking for the primary outcome, look for both the things. Look for the p-value. The p-value should be less than the alpha which has been defined. Alpha error alpha we usually will define alpha as 5%. So if the p-value is less than 5%, that tells you that your result is statistically significant. Similarly, don't forget to look at confidence interval. Confidence interval will not only tell you that your result is statistically significant, so it will tell you about significance, but it will also tell you how significant. Is it really a little significant, or is it quite significant? How far away from the center is your how far away from the standard is your intervention that you're done, right? So let me show this in context of this particular article to you. So let's come to this one. Here they have given us the p-value. The p-value is 0.02. We usually say that the p-value of less than 0.05 would be significant. So yes, this looks like a statistically significant result. That means 6.5% was the risk of developing MI or stroke in patients who receive aspirin. That risk has been reduced to 5% in patients who are giving clopidogrel plus aspirin, and that difference is statistically significant. It's what the p-value tells me. But if I look at the confidence interval, and there is a graph of the confidence interval overall over here, right? This is the graph of the confidence interval where I am comparing. One is when both the groups are same, right? If I go more than one, aspirin becomes better. If I come towards less than one, then aspirin plus clopidogrel is looking better. Right? Now I should see where is my graph. So if I come up, this overall that you can see, this one, this tells you, so you can see over here 6.5% in your aspirin arm, 5% in your clopidogrel arm. So if I analyze all the patients who are enrolled in this particular trial, 5% who were in the aspirin plus clopidogrel arm got the endpoint of having MI. I'll just use the word MI, but the composite endpoint. 6.5% in aspirin got this. That means this is the confidence interval, mean and the confidence interval of my study population. If this has crossed the central line, I would have said my result is not significant. Because it is not crossing that line, it is on one side, I'll say it is significant. If you don't have such a wide confidence interval, wide margins, I would have said my sample size is inadequate. But this is really looking very neat, small box. I'll say yes, my results are in a population which is of a reasonably good sample size, right? If I compare that with something below, something like if I take an example, well, there is no such graph I can see, but okay, if I take this one, compare it with this one in blacks, right? If I compare it in this population, black population, I can see that the results are even better in blacks. This is the net result of everything below, but in blacks the results are even better. The mean is far away from the equivalence, and it's an even better result, favorable for clopidogrel plus aspirin. And the the confidence interval is also slightly away compared to over here, slightly more away from the center, right? So I can look at the confidence interval and p-value, both of them together. And when I look at both of them together, that gives me an idea whether or not this is a trial I should believe in. Now, a lot of us start with this step. We look at the p-value and we look at the confidence interval. Don't do that. And remember, we have come to this step after a lot of steps. I already told you in this particular article, I would rather not pay attention to this p-value because I'll say, agar harm ho raha hai, to main to ye article ko believe hi nahi karunga. I would not want to use clopidogrel plus aspirin simply because it is harming people in this particular study. Not based on this study, I will not use clopidogrel plus aspirin. But if I would have started with the p-value, I will find, oh, p-value to significant hai. P-value significant hai, confidence interval अच्छा se cross ho raha hai. So I would say that this works. So be careful that you have taken all the previous steps before you look into the result now. So I go back to the question that we have. How large was the treatment effect? Was the what outcome was measured, and is the primary outcome clearly specified? Yes, they have clearly specified the primary outcome. What outcome was measured? They measured that what was the risk of death or because of MI or because of whatever, and how large was the treatment effect? It wasn't very large, but there was definitely a clinically relevant effect. How precise was the estimate of the effect? That is what we saw by that confidence interval. The confidence interval was coming very close to the central line, right? It was coming very close to that central line. So I would say the effect was not very big. अगर होता तो भी 6.5% or 5% में कितना फर्क है? It wasn't the very big effect that happened, but it came at a risk of adverse effects, right? Now I'm going to stop at this point, and I would like to take any questions that you have at this point. Was the last part clear? If that part was not clear, if there was any doubt left over there, I am assuming you understand the value and confidence interval and I'm kind of going through it. But if you want me to discuss anything out of that graph, I would want to wait, because understanding this part of the results is important. Before I go into the last part, last two questions that we need to, 2 or 3 questions we need to pick up.
So I was not able to understand that confidence interval wala thing in a good way. Like how is it shifting? Like what are we comparing exactly? Here we are not having any means as such, right? There are only percentages.
Okay.
So how are we comparing it?
Let me just draw that. Sorry. So whenever you are looking at confidence interval, it depends on what are you looking at. In this particular thing, we were looking at the hazard ratio. Let's replace that word hazard ratio with any ratio that I'm dealing with, right? Now, if I'm studying two groups, group A and group B, if both group A and group B are equal, then dividing their incidence of a number of events that occur in group A divided by number of events that occur in group B will be 1. If both of them are equal, then the result will be 1, right? So we usually take, whenever you are dealing with any ratio, the problem is you are comparing it with mean. Here it was a ratio that was taken into consideration. So if I take a ratio and it was a hazard ratio, then we say at 1, both of these are equal. If the ratio that you get is 1, then both of them are equal. Now, if A is better than B, then this should be the side that your result should go. Here A is better than B. And at this side you should come if B is better than A. Right? This is exactly what has happened in your particular graph that you saw. In the graph, if it is in front of you, you will find that in the graph it is written on this side, aspirin is better. On this side, aspirin plus clopidogrel is better. It doesn't matter whether you're making it more than 1 or less than 1. Depends on A or B kisko keh rahe ho. That doesn't matter. But on this side, if your result comes, you will say that aspirin is better. Aspirin plus clopidogrel is better. On this side of 1, if your hazard ratio lies, then aspirin itself is better. Now, when we talk about confidence interval, we say that there is this center line and this is your 95% confidence interval, right? Now, this center graph represents what you found in your trial. In my trial, this particular was whatever was the hazard ratio that I found. The risk of taking this versus the risk that I found in this, right? This is the hazard ratio. This is that ratio that I found in my trial, in your trial. But if you repeat this trial 100 times with the same kind of population, if other people come in and keep on repeating this trial 100 times, 95% times, that means 95 out of 100 times, if you repeat this trial, you will find that the result will be somewhere between this point to this point. Today you are getting it here, but if you tomorrow repeat it, you will get it somewhere here, you will get it here, you might get it here, you might get it here, you might get it here or here, but not cross it. So when I say that 95% confidence interval is, let's say now 0.1 to 0.9 and my hazard ratio was 0.5, what I'm saying is जो मुझे 0.5 आज मिला है ना, अगर मैं इस ट्रायल को रिपीट करूं 95% टाइम्स वो 0.1 और 0.9 के बीच की कोई वैल्यू आई. That is the meaning of 95% confidence interval. There is another way of saying this. That means if I repeat this trial, if you repeat my trial with the exact same parameters, you can get a value of 0.9 per also. 0.9 that you get and 0.5 that I get are not different. They are the same. They are statistically having no different meaning. They are the same. Any value from between 0.1 to 0.5 should be statistically given the same significance that you give to my value today, because for my trial, this is the confidence interval, 95% confidence interval. Which means now if I get your hazard ratio something like this, if I get your hazard ratio something like this, I will say that your value could have been this, but it could have been this also. So I will say at the best, तुम्हारा effect इतना हो सकता है, इतना फर्क हो सकता है center से. At the worst, तुम्हारा effect इतना हो सकता है. But इतना तो होगा ही, इससे कम effect नहीं है तुम्हारा. this is the effect size. Are you getting this? This is the effect size, right? But if you get something like this, if you do the trial and you find something like this, this is what I found, but my confidence interval was like this. ये problem है. ये problem क्यों है? Because तुमको आज जो यहाँ मिला ना, अगर ये study को 100 times repeat करो, तो तुम्हारा value ये भी हो सकता था, और ये भी हो सकता था, which means maybe there was no difference, or maybe there was actually a harm. Maybe what you're finding is out of chance. So your result is not significant, and your effect doesn't have a big size. I mean, there is no size, there is no difference between you and what you are testing for, right? So is this clear? If you find your graph has been this way in that table, you find that the topmost overall result is like this particular diagram, not like this diagram. If it would have been like this diagram, I would have said it is not significant. It has happened by chance. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
A little clear, maybe not so clear. Right, so go through the lectures that you have had on confidence interval and p-value. I'll just keep it at that. But remember to use this. Look at this chart that I showed you. That chart, you'll have to use that chart to figure out how much is your sample size and how away from that center are you. The farther away you get from the center, more is the effect that you have been able to demonstrate. Here the effect was not large. Remember, 6.5% and 5%, बहुत बड़ा difference नहीं है, right? So it's not a very big difference, really speaking. Any other questions at this point? Okay, so let's move towards the last part of the question. So finally, if you have understood what this trial has said, we need to still ask more questions. Is this going to help me locally when I'm trying to use these results locally? So can the results be applied locally? We have already tried to answer this in the past. That depends on the inclusion and exclusion criteria. The patient that they have included, is that the kind of patient that I am treating? If yes, I can use this locally. If not, no, I can't use this locally. There is one more way of looking at this one question. When you plan your thesis, always read the inclusion and exclusion criteria carefully. A lot of times students start their thesis thinking, I will try to prove this. But in whom are you trying to prove? That is equally important. If your inclusion and exclusion criteria were not very well thought of, then the results might not be very good. You cannot try to give a patient who has mild hypertension a very good drug and try to show that the drug works very well. But if you get to keep all the patients who have severe hypertension, when you give them a drug, you might be able to show that the drug works very well. Mild में काम नहीं कर रहा है, severe hypertension में काम कर रहा है. That could be a logical consequence, right? So take your inclusion and exclusion criteria very seriously when you're both criticizing an article as well as when you're trying to use that article for your purpose. Next is, were all the clinically relevant outcomes considered? Is there any additional aspect that you wanted information on? This will depend on, basically if you are a content expert, if you're an expert in that field, you will know what you are searching for. For example, when I'm taking patients on aspirin on one group and aspirin plus clopidogrel on another group, I want to know their composite outcome. I want to know how many of them bled, but I also want to know that how many of them had minor bleeding. Maybe the article has spoken about it. Maybe the article has not spoken about it. How many of them develop gastritis? Maybe the article has spoken about it. Maybe the article has not spoken about it. How many of them develop renal failure? Because maybe in my experience, I find that giving aspirin does not do it, but maybe I find that a particular drug does renal failure. Has that been mentioned in this particular trial? If they have not, then I would want to know it. I'll give you an example. A few years back, there was this very interesting article on tuberculosis. And they try to study whether giving a prophylactic drug helps to prevent tuberculosis. Now that was a very good article published in a reputed journal, and the journal had, it had all the right questions. I could mark a tick in all the boxes that we have seen till now. But the question in my mind was, if I'm going to give a drug for prophylaxis in a country like India, now this wasn't done in India, this was a trial done somewhere else. But if I use a prophylaxis drug in India for tuberculosis, what about drug resistance? Well, that article had not answered that question. That doesn't mean I reject that article, but that means I should not rely on only that article. I should find more articles like that which answer that question. What about drug resistance when I give prophylaxis? And if I don't find anything, then that's the research question I should make a trial on, if I have the resources to do it, right? So that's how science goes ahead, that I try to find what is it that they should have answered and have not answered. Either I should write a question to them, what happened to this? I can write an email to the authors, or if I find no answer, I might decide to take that as my inclusion criteria and do a trial to answer that question. Right? Okay. And last question is, are the harms and benefits worth, are the benefits, worth the harm and the cost? In this particular case, they had clearly stopped the trial because there was a harm. So in this particular case, of course, the answer is no. But most of the cases, you will find that the art journal has told you that the drug works, it helps. You will have to ask the question, what was this adverse effects that occurred? You should look at the adverse effect chart separately. In this one, you did not need to, because they had already committed that हमारे पास adverse effects ज़्यादा हो रहे थे. If the adverse effects were not much, then you have to see whether the cost is something that your country can take. Is it a cheap therapy that they are advising? Is it a costly therapy that they are advising? For example, they might tell you that, if I compare in rheumatoid arthritis, methotrexate with methotrexate plus adalimumab works better. सुनने में बहुत अच्छा लगता है. But when you actually see in real world, methotrexate might cost someone 200 rupees in a month, and adalimumab might cost 2,000 rupees in a month. Sorry, 20,000 rupees in a month. 200 versus 20,000 rupees. Is that how much the benefit was in this particular trial? Now, these authors might not answer that, because they did not power that design. They did not design the trial to answer this question. But you will have to keep on answering when you critically analyze a given study, right? So with that, I would like to bring my talk to a conclusion. I would like to say this is all that I had to say. And I would like to thank you for kind of giving me this opportunity of being here. But I would like to stay around and take your questions. Thank you.
So other than this article, like there are many articles where there are many graphs given or many complicated statistical analysis and tests are given which we are not aware of, or like don't know how to interpret those things. Correlations ho gaya, regressions ho gaya. Then how do we come to a conclusion from those?
So again, as I told you right at the beginning of this talk, that depends on your. So you cannot criticize an article without understanding the statistics of it. I have given you a checklist of where to look for, right? But within that, each of these questions will have further sub questions. I have given you a very broad overstroke. Your question, I get it. But if you don't understand correlation, it will be difficult. If you don't understand p-value and confidence interval, it will be difficult. If you don't understand how trial designs were made, it will be difficult. If you don't understand how sample size was calculated or how it gets affected by this particular thing, it will be difficult. In this particular graph, the article also that I have shared with you, there are graphs which I have not gone into. But all of that will require you to independently know those things before you can criticize an article. Right. So I will just say that you'll have to know it before you actually attempt criticizing the article. So that's all I have to say right now. And you can't try to criticize an article without knowing all of them. You need, those are the tools. If you know them, then you know how to criticize that. So biostats knowledge will be required, okay, no doubt in that.
Yes.
In fact, I would like to put it this way: biostats is the tool, toolkit. उस toolkit के बिना आगे जाना मुश्किल है.
Thank you very much, sir, for the talk. I have this one question. I don't think it's directly related to the current talk that we had, but supposedly if I want to write a letter to the editor about any study that is published in a journal. So what are the key aspects that I could write on?
So if I'm getting a question, you're saying that if you want to write a letter to the editor, what are the key aspects that you can write on? Is that right? Pawan, is that right? Is that what you asked? Okay, so I think there's some network issue here. So yes, if you are trying to, yeah. Okay. So if you are writing an article to the, if you are writing a letter to the editor, oh yeah, thank you, you have written that down in the chat box, yes. So if you are writing a letter to the letter to the editor has to be in relevance to something. For example, if you read this particular article and you had a question on this particular article, and you thought that the article has mentioned a particular aspect. Let's say you have mentioned that so many people had so much harm, and then they still continue to follow up the patient for 7 more days, for example. Now you might have a question in your mind, are 7 days you follow kiya? Why did you not follow them for maybe 1 month? Maybe in your experience, now there is a logic why they followed for 7 days, because they know that aspirin has a half-life. After 7 days, the risk of bleeding comes down if you stop aspirin. So if they have not clarified a certain issue, you can write a letter to the editor asking why was this not done, or what was done about it. You can write an article to a letter to the editor. You can also directly write a letter to the authors also. Very often when the article is new, you write it to the editor. Sometimes you can directly write to the authors that, why was so and so thing done. So there has to be a context why you write that letter. Otherwise, you can't just randomly write your opinions about something. Smaller journals, with a lesser viewership, lesser strong protocols, less number of people applying to them, they might publish anybody's letter even for a minor issue. But NEJM, Lancet, they will not publish minor letters. They might reply to you saying that this is what we have found, but they might not publish a letter. To get a letter which is kind of worthy of being published to these journals, you need to point out something which is of importance, which maybe they have overlooked. Then they will acknowledge it, saying, okay, we probably didn't know about it, probably didn't think about it. When you wrote us this question, we asked it to the authors and they have replied this, and this is the answer. And so that is how usually the letter to editor works. Any other questions?
So then, other than clinical trials, suppose we are looking for some evidence regarding prevalence or occurrence, or to start a new trial, we are looking for a hypothesis which we can test, or for a research study which has been done somewhere else, we want to replicate it in our area. So for that, what would be a best type of research paper which we should try to read? Like, should we read the case control and cross-sectional studies, or should we just refer to the meta-analysis of those?
So it's a very broad question that you are asking, Shri. It's a very good question. It's a broad question. Let me just quickly, kind of present that overview to you. It's not a complete thing, but it might help you to think this through, right? So let's say that you are in a point in your career where you want to start doing a particular trial. You will have to come to a research question. This is the crux of the matter, that you need to have a research question. You will reach this research question in most probability from your clinical practice. As a clinician in India, you will have a lot of exposure to patients. You will see those patients and you will find that, मुझे ये सही नहीं लग रहा है, मुझे ये समझ नहीं आ रहा, मेरे ये patients को ये problem हो रहा है, right? So there you will have some questions in your mind. When you get questions in your mind, you will have to go to search engines like PubMed or otherwise and find out which are the other articles which have tried to answer this question, right? They have, now when you go there, you will want to do exact exercise that we did right now, that every article that you pick up, you'll go through this flowchart that you did right now. We did it for one article, but you might go through many articles, right? And when you do it on an individual level, you will do a PICO for all of them and see whether my patient and the patient that is mentioned in this article, is it matching? Okay, then this question is the question that they're answering. When you do this, and when you read multiple articles, maybe into N, you will find that all of these articles leave at the end of it some areas which are unanswered. Now, science has reached this stage where, apart from something like COVID, which is very new, you will find that if you look at your question, the question very often will have sub-questions. And you will find that most of the articles have answered majority of that part of sub-question of your question. So, for example, my question was that in a patient who is taking methotrexate and adalimumab, is adalimumab helpful? They have answered that question. Yes, adalimumab is helpful. But now my problem is adalimumab is costly. So can I give a lower dose of adalimumab? That is unanswered. Should I use the dose that they have tried, or can I use a lower dose? That is unanswered. So you will find that there are some unanswered questions that remain. These unanswered questions are known as areas of uncertainty. These areas of uncertainties are not necessarily highlighted by the articles. In some journals like AnyGym, they will highlight the areas of uncertainty, that we have found out this, but there is some part which still remains in the discussion part. But most of the times these are not highlighted. This is something where you as a researcher, you as a clinician will have to work, will have to screen through different articles to find out what are the areas of uncertainty and make a list of them. And you'll find that recurrently there is one area of uncertainty which comes up, which nobody has answered. If I want to say that there's an area of uncertainty, of course I'll have to go back and check more articles and see that there is ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए मुझे लग रहा है ये area of uncertainty है, किसी और ने उसको answer कर रखा है. When I find that eventually no, there is one area of uncertainty which nobody has answered, this is my research question. So what I'm saying is, when you start your work, you start with your clinical question. But for that clinical question to be converted into a research question, you have to read these articles which have come before you. You will have to screen them. You'll have to apply your knowledge of statistics or knowledge of study designs to them. These could be different types of studies. It doesn't matter what type of study you're studying. What matters is you have studied everything which has been done before you on that topic, on that question. Everything that is available has been done. So when you do a PubMed search, you need to be very specific and you need to find this. And then you find what are the areas of uncertainty and you answer the research question. Most of the times, if you're doing something really good, really big, the articles before you are also RCTs. That means it's unlikely that your research question will be giving an answer without doing an RCT. You will have to do an RCT. Right? This is ideal. I'm not saying this is always easy or possible. I'm saying this is ideal. कि आपके पहले अगर RCTs हो चुके हैं, तो you will have to look at an RCT yourself. But if you're planning to do a case control study or a cohort study, that is also not wrong. It depends on how you want to tackle this question. You can tackle this question by doing a case control or cohort and say that today I'm going to do a case control or cohort. Later in future, my team will do a RCT also, but I'll start with this. That's also okay. If you don't have enough resources to do RCT, start with this. That's also okay. Right? But there is another way of reaching this same story. One way is this, that you start with a clinical question. There can be another way, that you are a group who wants to do a lot of research. And ऐसा नहीं है ना कि मेरे पास बहुत सारे patients को देख के सवाल आते हैं. Sometimes I get questions when I see patients, but sometimes I might want to just do research because I like to do research. I want to do more research, and I am a group which is funded enough, which has resources enough to do an RCT. If you want to start a new RCT, now a lot of journals will ask you, भैया तुम RCT करना क्यों चाहते हो? क्या तुम्हारे पहले किसी ने प्रूव नहीं किया तुम जो प्रूव करना चाहते हो? तुम कहोगे नहीं सर हमारे पहले प्रूव किया ही होगा. तो जर्नल्स तुमको कहेंगे अगर तुम RCT करना चाहते हो और उसमें इतना एफर्ट डालना चाहते हो, उसमें पैसा जाएगा, उसमें टाइम जाएगा, इतने पेशेंट्स एक्सपोज होंगे उस ड्रग को और कंट्रोल आर्म को, एथिक्स का सवाल आएगा, तो उसके पहले पता करो कि क्या इस पे सच में कोई आंसर नहीं है. दैट स्टेप कि पता करो क्या सच में इसमें कोई आंसर नहीं है is where very important step comes in. What you can do is you can look all these articles up which have been done before you. That means you look at all the case control, cohort, whatever articles which have been done before you, and you come up with a meta-analysis. The meta-analysis tells you what has been done and what has not been done. What are the areas of uncertainty can be an answer you can get out of meta-analysis also. Right? You might get it directly by an informal way, but you can also formally get it without looking at this. You can directly start by the area of your interest, look at the articles, look at the meta-analysis, create a meta-analysis, do a meta-analysis yourself, and then go towards a research question. As an undergraduate, doing a meta-analysis is going to be tough, not impossible. There are students who have done it, but it's tough. You need a good guide. Your person in your college, a good statistical team can help you to do a meta-analysis. And when you publish a meta-analysis, you yourself can say these are the areas of uncertainty where new research should occur. You might take up that research, or someone else might read your meta-analysis and do that research. That's also a way forward to get to the research question, right? A research question is something where you can prove something in future, but to reach that research question, you need to go through these two paths, either go the clinical path or come from a meta-analysis path, right? So I hope I answered your question there.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So, are there any more questions for sir? I guess no. Okay, then we can call it a day. So, thank you so much, sir, for helping us understand all the critical parts of reading a journal and helping us read more and more journals in the future and encouraging us to participate in research and keep us updated.
Absolutely, my pleasure, and I'm really glad you guys are starting so early. So best of luck to your forward journey. Right?
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.